Let's look at interest group strategies. Today it's direct strategies, which involve actual contact between representatives of the interest groups and policymakers. And tomorrow it's indirect strategies, which use intermediaries to advocate for a cause or generally to attempt to persuade the public, including policymakers, to embrace the group's position. Groups often opt for direct strategies when they seek to secure passage or defeat of a specific piece of legislation. These strategies include lobbying, entering into litigation to change a law, and providing information or expert testimony to decision makers. Interest groups hire professionals to lobby or to communicate directly with policymakers on the interest group's behalf. President Ulysses S. Grant coined the term lobbyist when he walked through the lobby of the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., and commented on the presence of lobbyists waiting to speak to members of Congress. Today, lobbying is among the most common strategies that interest groups use, and the practice may include scheduled face-to-face meetings, buttonholing members of Congress as they walk through the Capitol, telephone calls and receptions, and special events hosted by the interest groups. The professional lobbyists whom interest groups hire are almost always lawyers, and their job is to cultivate ongoing relationships with members of Congress and their staff who have influence in a specific policy area. In many situations, lobbyists help navigate access to these policymakers for industry and interest group members. Interest groups have learned that one of the most effective ways of influencing government is to hire as lobbyists former government officials, including cabinet officials, members of Congress, and congressional staffers. This is known as the revolving door. Because these ex-officials often enjoy good relationships with their former colleagues and have an intimate knowledge of the policy-making process, they are particularly effective in influencing government. Frequently, this practice creates an issue network, the fluid web of connections among those concerned about a policy and those who create and administer the policy. Similarly, an interest group's efficacy often depends on its having close relationships with the policymakers involved in decisions related to the group's causes. During the rough and tumble policymaking process, the interaction of mutual interest groups among a trio comprising members of Congress, executive departments and agencies, and organized interest groups is sometimes referred to as an iron triangle, with each of the three players being on one side of the triangle. Although each side in an iron triangle is expected to fight on behalf of its own interests, constituents, or governmental department, the triangle often seeks a policy outcome that benefits all parts of the triangle. Often, this outcome occurs because of close personal and professional relationships that develop as a result of the interactions among the sides of an issue-based triangle. Sometimes interest groups challenge a policy in the courts. For example, the 2010 U.S. Supreme Court case that resulted in a drastically altered political landscape for campaign funding came as the result of a lawsuit filed by an interest group. In Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, the interest group Citizens United argued that federal bans on corporate and union expenditures to promote or target candidates for federal office violated the organization's right to free speech. A 5-4 majority of Supreme Court justices agreed with the interest group and lifted the ban. By litigating, interest groups can ensure that laws passed by legislatures and signed by executives are in keeping with current constitutional interpretation. By bringing their causes before the courts, they also can shape policy and encourage enforcement by executive agencies. Make sure that you understand and can recognize the word litigation. It's oftentimes on the AP test. Interest groups are one of the chief sources of information for policymakers. Interest groups have the resources to investigate the impact of policies. They have access to data, technological know-how, and a bevy of experts with extensive knowledge of the issues. Most interest groups provide information to policymakers, and policymakers understand that the information received is slanted towards the group's interests. But if competing interest groups supply information to policymakers, then policymakers can weigh the merits of the various sets of information. The dangerous part is when there is not an offsetting set of information. Sometimes interest groups use celebrities as experts to testify, knowing that they will attract greater attention than most policy experts. For example, actor George Clooney testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations concerning findings from his Satellite Sentinel project, an organization he founded that uses satellites to monitor conflict and human rights abuses in the Sudan.